Hi, what I am about to confess to you, I have kept secret for many years, as I never dared to tell anyone out of fear and shame. But you know, there are certain advantages of growing old. For starters, I care much less about the good opinions of others. In fact, pardon my French, but I couldn't give a shit anymore. Life is too short. Ideas and thoughts need to be expressed, not repressed, or we will end up with creative constipation or worse. If just one person out there benefits from what I have to say, or can perhaps avoid falling into the same traps as I did, then confessing like this will be worth it. So, in 1984, I was lucky enough to be able to travel to Boston to study at the famous Berkeley College of Music. A dream come true, the envy of many, I would hazard to say. Funny thing, the ignorance and arrogance of youth. You see, I really thought I was something special before I traveled to Massachusetts, and I was proud of my raucous, flashy saxophone style. But boy, was I in for a shock. Within hours of being at the impressive facilities, the baptism of fire had begun, as I started to hear and perceive the difference between my paltry music abilities and what seemed to me the pro level of some of the Berkeley students. In one of the first college meetings, they told us, the freshman students, that only 10% of us would complete the 4-year course and graduate, that 90% of us would give up, and that after 10 further years, only 10% of the graduates would still even be in the music business. Cheering statistics indeed, but I was not fazed. I wanted to learn, as I was obsessed with music, and still am. Upon arrival at Berkeley, we, the freshmen, were submitted to an audition for rating purposes, so they could assess what level our improvisation, technique and reading, etc. were. A higher rating gave you the opportunity to play with more advanced students, and of course was better for your ego and kudos. It was possible to retake this audition each semester as well, which motivated us as we could chart our progress and be able to move to higher ensembles if we improved. After my first audition, one of the judges said to me, summing up, "You play pretty good, but you don't play enough eighth notes." I remember a red flag going up in my mind somewhere as I digested his words. You see, I had a style at that time that was kind of melodic, so I thought the idea of the quantity of notes to be a bit strange. However, I was young, I wanted higher ratings, to progress, to play with better players, so I set about practicing more eighth notes on complex jazz standards, such as giant steps and moment's notice, putting my attention on advanced things, focusing little on basic tunes, chords, etc., eschewing them even. Now I am going to get to the painful part of my story, when I relate to you 2 humbling real-life experiences that occurred when I moved back to the UK, that indelibly taught me that no amount of complex jazz standard practice was sufficient preparation for life as an all-round gigging musician. Something that during my 2.5 years at Berkeley, no teacher had ever spoken to us impressionable students about. Confession 1. A couple of months after returning back to London, a fellow Ex Berklee alumno, a talented drummer friend, booked me for what we would call a casual gig. No rehearsal, just playing standards in a bar. I seem to recall that everything was going well, as it was all quite low-key and relaxed, and we were just playing well-known jazz standards. After a couple of tunes, I think it was the keyboard player who suggested that we try something different, to change the mood. He proposed a song by the Beatles. I was a bit surprised, The Beatles on a jazz gig? Anyway, I thought, why not? Who was I to make a fuss? So there and then, without further ado, we settled on Hey Jude, or maybe it was Let It Be, I cannot quite remember. The pianist indicated the key and counted the tune off. Playing the melody on the saxophone, I realized, shit, this is not so easy as I had thought. Of course, it was live, so I had no chance to stop or go back and correct, as is the beauty of jazz improvisation in real time. I got through the ordeal, the tune, by kind of jazzing up the mistakes, but it was rough and the experience was uncomfortable. As well, I sensed that the other guys in the band knew that I had faked it. I was humiliated. Deep down, I felt like a charlatan. After the gig, I kept asking myself, how come I can't busk a basic melody flawlessly without music? Especially if I have oodles of technique, know all the keys of music like the back of my hand, and can play complex jazz standards. I knew something was deeply wrong. There was a massive cognitive dissonance between how good I thought I was as a jazz musician and the actual reality of my prowess as an all-round musician. I had to admit it. I had not had the humility to even want to develop the ability to learn to play simple tunes by ear. It was incredible. Confession story number 2. The first continuous paying gig that I landed on moving back to London after Berkeley was with the legendary singer, Geno Washington. Geno, an English kind of version of James Brown, played a highly energetic brand of rhythm and blues. His somewhat improvised on-stage arrangements that varied so much from night to night, depending on his humor, featured interludes of horn solos. I suppose giving him time to collect his ideas and rest, such was the energy he expended, and he was no spring chicken even back then. When I joined Geno's band fresh out of Berkeley, I had obviously heard quite a lot of rhythm and blues, but had hardly ever played it, not giving it much attention as my myopic focus had been solely on jazz. Telling this story, I realize now I must confess something else. That back then, I actively avoided playing other kinds of music, apart from jazz, as somehow I let myself be indoctrinated into thinking that by listening to and playing other styles of music, my jazz playing would be contaminated. How pathetic. It's sad that I denied myself the pleasure of experiencing other styles of music for a period of my life. Incredible, really. However, I was not alone in my closed-mindedness. There were other musicians on the London scene who were also elitist about jazz. I even remember a bass player in London criticizing one of the most amazing musicians England has ever produced, drummer and pianist Gary Husband, for playing with pop bands from time to time. What a tremendously unconscious, lamentable thing to do, criticize such a gifted and open musician. Anyway, I digress from my confession. So in Geno's band, the horn players were required to play funky, exciting, soulful R&B solos, congruent with a genre that featured simple harmony and basic, straight grooves. So, before Geno came on stage, the band played an instrumental warm-up tune. It was like a calypso ska groove with just one chord, a major triad. And here comes the cringe-worthy part of the experience that I most remember. My first solo ever on this tune, on just one naked bare major 3-note chord, not even a 6th or 7th to be seen anywhere. It was another live baptism of fire. You see, I had never even tried to solo on just one extended major chord before. We certainly never entertained such preposterous ideas at Berkeley. I had no experience in such a thing. I could play giant steps, 2/5 patterns in 12 keys, altered dominants, etc., but I could not improvise a convincing soul solo on 32 bars on an F major chord. I could not come up with the goods. My prepared bebop licks sounded incongruous. My tasty choice 2/5 patterns did not fit the style. In short, it was a humiliating roast-up. Of course, I managed, I suppose, to play something, some high notes and other tricks and basic licks, but I was painfully aware again of the cognitive dissonance between my ability to play complex jazz standards versus my inability to solo convincingly over a one-chord major vamp. Conclusion. I learned a lot from the uncomfortable musical experiences I have confessed here, as these painful moments forced me to take a reality check, be more open, and listen and practice different styles, which ultimately helped me grow. The only thing is, I do wonder why no one at Berkeley ever mentored us about the trap of closed-mindedness and the pitfalls of focusing purely on jazz. Music is not about being elitist or the ego. I believe it is about revealing honestly what we have inside and connecting with the listener. And I believe it is healthy to talk about these kind of things. Finally, if you are a bit of a slow learner like me, do not be discouraged if you find you have gaps in your knowledge. There are advantages to being a non-genius. I should know. Like having to devise and explore systems of study, looking at things from different angles, finding solutions, etc. Please, I urge you, dear listener, not to fall into the trap of stunting your growth by limiting your horizons or by a myopic attitude to music or even life. Thanks for listening. I would very much welcome your comments on this matter if you feel you have anything to add or share. Cheers.